Good morning. A call to order the Interior and Related Agencies Subcommittee markup. Welcome members here this morning as we begin markup of the fiscal year 2017 Interior Appropriations Bill. I noted last year that it was the first time that this subcommittee had held a markup in 6 years. So today is 2 years in a row, so I think this is now tradition. I'm good with that. That's a trend that I plan to continue as long as I'm chairman, and I would certainly hope that my friend and ranking member, Senator Udall, feels the same way. By moving our bill through the process in regular order, we're giving our colleagues an opportunity to express their views about the bill with an open debate and amendment process. And that's the essence of what we do in the Senate, and the Interior bill should be no different simply because it occasionally includes some controversial issues. This bill includes funding for all of the major federal land management agencies, the National Park Service, the Bureau of Land Management, the Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Forest Service. It also provides funding for essential Indian health, education, and resource management programs through the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Indian Health Service, as well as funding for important cultural institutions like the Smithsonian Institution, the National Gallery of Art, and the National Endowments for the Arts and Humanities. And it provides funding for the Environmental Protection Agency. The administration's request for the 2016 Interior Bill is approximately $33.1 billion, including $1.1 billion of emergency funding. The subcommittee's allocation is slightly more than $32 billion. This is roughly $125 million less than the subcommittee was allocated last year. However, given that certain cost increases for tribal contract support costs and funding the 10-year average for firefighting must be provided under CBO's scoring rules, the allocation is effectively $340 million below last year. Despite our limited resources, we were able to fund a number of increases requested by the administration and supported by many members of the committee. These include large increases for Indian Health Service, BIA, and the Centennial of the National Park Service, as well as the water infrastructure accounts within the EPA. So I'd give you a brief summary this morning of some of the important funding priorities contained within the bill. For the centennial year of the National Park Service, we increase funding by $66.5 million for new park units and regular and deferred maintenance, which will help address the large backlog that exists within our park system. For the Forest Service, we provide a $10 million increase necessary to boost timber outputs and support local economies, as well as a $15 million increase for the Hazardous Fuels Program to reduce the risk of fire. In the two main agencies that deliver services for the Indian community, BIA and IHS, we did our best to provide as much funding as possible to programs critical to the Indian community, and for both agencies, we provide full contract support costs. Within the BIA, the bill continues funding tribal courts in so-called PL 280 states and substantially increases for education programs, public safety and justice programs, and social services programs. For the Indian Health Service, we invested an additional $186 million on the most pressing issues facing Indian country, including suicide, domestic violence, and alcohol and substance abuse program. We also provided funding for infrastructure improvements at healthcare facilities around the country. For wildland fire management programs, we have provided a total of $3.79 billion for the Department of the Interior and the Forest Service. This fully funds the 10-year average for firefighting costs. We also provide $25 million above the President's request for hazardous fuels reduction activities to ensure that we are actively making progress in reducing fire risk. Fire seasons, I think we recognize, are getting undeniably worse. Last year, I led the charge with many of my colleagues to add $700 million in emergency funds on the CR for firefighting to repay the Forest Service for amounts that they borrowed from non-fire programs. I also worked to include $600 million above the 10-year average in the FY17 bill so that hopefully there's no need to borrow this fire season, but we need a more permanent solution to fire budgeting. This is why this bill includes a proposal to end fire borrowing at the Forest Service and within the Department of Interior. I hope that that's something that we can all agree upon. Rather than using budget gimmicks to move significant portions of the fire program off budget, My proposal continues the practice of fully funding the 10-year average for firefighting and provides access to disaster funding through a cap adjustment when those regular suppression funds have been exhausted. I think maintaining this fiscal discipline is necessary to avoid simply providing a blank check to the firefighting agencies without providing cost control incentives. So the proposal to stop fire borrowing, I believe, should have enormous benefits for both the Department of Interior and the Forest Service, as land managers will not have to hold back funds in anticipation of fire borrowing, which leads to lost field work seasons, failure to process special use permits, and increased costs for projects that are delayed over longer periods. So let me turn to one of the more controversial agencies within the bill, and that's the EPA. I think we took a common sense approach to the EPA's budget and focused resources on programs that do concrete things to improve the quality of the environment for the public. We fully met the request for an additional $157 million for the Drinking Water SRF, which builds critical infrastructure for clean drinking water in communities across the country. Instead of following the President's suggestion to cut the Clean Water SRF by more than $400 million, we maintained a robust level of $1.35 billion. When coupled with the financing authority we provide through the newly established WIFIA program, the agency has a powerful suite of tools to improve the quality of life for people around the country. And I think that this is something that as we went through or are continuing to go through the situation in Flint and the awareness that has been raised about water infrastructure around the country, this is a very, very necessary part of our budget. On the regulatory side of the EPA budget, this bill makes cuts in areas where the EPA has overstepped its bounds. Several program areas that have issued controversial rules that are currently blocked in court are reduced, because I believe it's more important to provide resources to programs that yield tangible results in improving the environment instead of funding more lawyers and bureaucrats to draft rules of questionable legality and dubious environmental benefit. Finally, this bill also funds PILT at the fully authorized level of $480 million. Now, I'd also like to offer one thought on the policy provisions contained within this bill. The bill does include a number of policy provisions that are important to members within the Senate. Some of the provisions that were included are bipartisan. Others were included at the request of the majority, and others were included at the request of the minority. We have had policy provisions in appropriations bills as long as I've been here, and this bill continues in that tradition. One such provision is a parochial issue. It's certainly of great importance to me, great importance to Alaska. The bill does include language to allow for the construction of a life-saving road from King Cove to Cold Bay. I know that my colleagues appreciate how important this issue is to me and to Alaskans. I recognize the need to protect the environment, but recognize that it should not come at the expense of jeopardizing the lives of those that I represent. I included this provision in the bill last year, but you will see it again, and I will tell you what I have told the people of King Cove, that I will never stop fighting for them, and I will use every tool available to me to prevent the further loss of life. I'd like to close by expressing my appreciation to the ranking member of the subcommittee, Senator Udall. He and his staff have been a true pleasure, and I appreciate the good work that has gone into this as you have helped us shape this bill so that it reflects the priorities of members on both sides of the aisle. And before I turn to you, Senator Udall, I would hope that I can speak for both of us when I say that if there's no objection, we would appreciate it if members would hold off on amendments until the full committee markup on Thursday. Subcommittee staff will be available to work with all of you in preparing a manager's package for that mark, so we would ask that you would let us know as soon as possible of any amendments that you may wish to offer at that time. So with that, I turn to my partner and ranking member, Senator